Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royce. I'm a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Yoga and Vaastu are sister sciences originated in Eastern South Asia and mainly in India. They have been around for thousands of years, but are still popular today. These sciences emphasize energies and happiness. What are the secret behind these sciences? I'm excited to have Sumita on our show today, and she will explain how she practices these sciences in her daily life and some guidance for us. Welcome, Sumita.
Hi, Daphne. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to share the knowledge behind Vastu and its sister science, yoga. And there is another sister science I'd like to introduce to your audience, which is called Ayurveda, because it is really the combination of these three that enhances energy in a dwelling. It could be in your home or workspace. And so I will talk about each of these in turn and give you hopefully a broad enough understanding of how we can energize with these three ancient sciences.
Of course. Would you mind tell us a little bit about you and your business?
Yes. Well, I'm the founder of Omni Wellness, which is an online well-being platform. And it is a new business, even though I have been working in this field for the last 25 years. But coming online has been new thanks to COVID. So I hope that your listeners will hop on to omniwellness.org and have a look at all that I would like to share in the field of well-being. And my background really started with me studying yoga. It was with this exposure to energizing through movement that I discovered Ayurveda and eventually Vastu. Um, my academic background wasn't in any of these fields to start with. I was working in Europe, in Hong Kong, in a youth organization, in conference management with the UN. And the next thing I know is that I'm very intrigued about how to enhance energy. Mostly because despite being very young, I was already depleting my energy sources with a lifestyle that was obviously needed amendment. And so when I discovered yoga and its impact on my energy level, I couldn't stop there and continue to study Ayurveda and eventually Vastu and now even Jyotish. I hate to introduce the fourth science here. I think the other three are difficult enough to pronounce, but there's a lot of interrelationship between energies, and I'll explain more as I proceed with answering your questions.
So this is the first time I heard the word Ayurveda. Would you mind to explain what Ayurveda is?
Yes, Ayurveda is the science of holistic living. It's ancient science, and the word Veda actually denotes knowledge. So in India, we have one of these four categories of knowledge. They're called four books, but there were more than four books. It was really four categories of knowledge. And these four Vedas then gave rise to sub-Vedas. And in these sub-Vedas is the Ayurveda, Vastu, Yoga. These have all originated from these broader four categories. So Ayurveda is very similar to what you would think about in terms of biology. Biology is the science of life, and so is Ayurveda. It is broader, though, than equating it to biology. And the way it manifests in our life is that it gives us guidance on how to live, whether that involves, what to eat, when to eat, how to have deep rest, what sort of movement we should be practicing, including what sort of connection and deep connection we can involve in our life. So it's a very um, broad science. It includes preventive medicine, it includes circadian medicine, um, and um, and the way that I practice it as a clinical Ayurvedic specialist is to simplify it for the audience, I really do it through these four pillars of health, through nourishment, through movement, through deep rest and connection. And these four pillars will come up again and again as we talk through energizing and energetics today.
And what is Vaastu?
So Vastu is it's also one of the Vedic sciences. And what it does is it talks about architecture and design. So it gives us an idea of how to design space in order to enhance energy in our life. So it optimizes energy and helps us design space so that we can feel energetic, happy, and joyful in our dwellings. Also, it could be applicable to a workspace. And I think that's a fair enough summary. The one thing I would say about Vastu that since I spoke in Ayurveda and I said there are four pillars of health that I work with, in Vastu we work with 8 directions. So we're obviously familiar with the obvious 4, north, south, east, and west. And then there is the sub-directions of northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest. So that makes it 8.
So how do we use Ayurveda and also Vastu in today's world?
Yes, good question. Both these sciences, despite the fact that they are as ancient as they are, and I can give you a ballpark figure of between 5 and 10,000 years in terms of their, origin. So how does the science that originated back then, help us today or guide us today? It's quite amazing that everything that these sciences proposed and suggested is, I would think, even more so valuable in our lives today. And the reason I say that is because these sciences are giving us guidance on how to live in harmony with nature. That's what comes from Vastu as well as Ayurveda. They teach us how to live in harmony with nature. And if you think about where we are today with climate change, with the environmental impact of, population rise and so on our planet, we couldn't have a better resource than some of this ancient guidance. And it gives us this guidance in a very organic and simple way, very logical, intuitive. So when you read these sciences and you familiarize yourself with them, you realize that it's so simple to follow their recommendations. It doesn't take any money or big shifts in the way we are living. It's just little small tips. And if we were to adapt to this way of life, we will realize just how relevant they can be in our day-to-day life. And that's as far as the environmental impact and so on. But there is this other aspect of life today. It's very busy. We are all depleted. In general, the way I understand based on what my clients present with, the type of symptoms, I've been able to say that pretty much everyone is looking either to enhance energy in their life, or they're looking to reduce stress, or they're looking to discover peace. And if we could just deliver these 3 things for people, it would be I think we would all have what we're looking for. And that's what these sciences provide. They give us energy, they give us, they reduce stress, and they help us discover peace.
It sounds like it will bring the sense of peacefulness to the life. You mentioned earlier about yoga. How would yoga and Vastu and Ayurveda can bring happiness?
Yeah. Another good question. And It's a tough one to answer because having practiced all these sciences for so long, I can't imagine that there is any formula to this. But on hindsight, when I look back, I realize that there is a formula that works when we are following these sciences. And to put it simply, it's a two-step process. So the first way that these sciences bring happiness to us is it teaches us, first of all, what is happiness. There's a whole philosophy behind the science. And that philosophy suggests that happiness is out here for everyone to experience when we discover it within ourselves. But in order to find it in ourselves, we have to have, you can call it 4 steps, or you can call it certain values. And without these values, we are not likely to discover happiness in ourselves. So what are these 4 values that, I'd like to share these with you because they're so crucial to understanding how yoga, Ayurveda, Vaastu bring happiness into our life. Because I can give you a lot of tips today about, where to position your room, what sort of colors to use in your house, how to use these 4 pillars of health, how to appease our 5 senses. But unless we're all on the same page about these 4 values that will support our happiness, we could just be, doing these little gimmicky things, but not really achieving the end result. So I would like to spend a moment just sharing what these 4 values are. So in order to be on the same page about, happiness, basically the Vedas, toward the end of these books of knowledge, they summarize in something called Vedanta. And Vedanta is a philosophy that says that the 4 values are, there is, first of all, the intention toward seeking happiness should be ethical. It should be an ethical intention and one that is purposeful. So when we have identified a purposeful and ethical intention toward happiness, we are all starting that process of seeking what is true happiness. Otherwise, we could be seeking happiness, which is temporary and will gratify for a few minutes, but will not last. So the first value is we need this intention of purposeful and ethical intention. And another value that is proposed is that we should have something called, I'm trying to translate from Sanskrit in my mind to English. So just going down the list, the second one is, artha, which is our economy or our financial means should allow us to look for happiness. So what they're saying is that it is almost a given that unless we are financially and economically secure, we're not going to be looking for happiness in a very meaningful way. So they're saying that you can't be looking for happiness but neglect your financial security and your economic security. So, be practical, take into account that you have a system set in place that allows you an income so that you have the basic requirement before you seek, happiness beyond your basics. So make sure you have food on your plate and, a house over your head, and then you can look for this happiness. And some of us are fortunate enough to have that, and so we start seeking happiness. But if you don't have that, it is understood that you may not have the time and energy to be seeking happiness. You're just seeking that basic fulfillment. So that is just to acknowledge that we are fortunate to be having this discussion. And the third value that is proposed is of motivation, to have a motivation to seek this happiness and to do things in life, but to make sure that that motivation is not something that you're very attached to and something that doesn't become your sole expectation. So if you're looking for happiness, but that is the end result, you may not actually enjoy it when you experience it, because happiness cannot be the end result. It's just a means toward this final aim, which is that of liberation and freedom from even wanting happiness. So there's a lot of philosophy packed into that, but I wanted to put that out there, that when yoga, Vastu, and Ayurveda talk about happiness, that's the kind of happiness that they're asking, for you to want. So when you start looking at life in this way and you say, okay, I want to be blissful, joyful, and happy, how can these sciences deliver to me what I'm looking for? Well, they can deliver this to you in a way that is just a tool. So, you'll have the Ayurveda says, here are your 4 pillars of health, and use them to achieve a sense of well-being, which will bring to you that sense of happiness. And yoga says, here's a series of exercises that you can practice that will help you, including meditation, breathing, asana, and these will help you, feel better physically, give you mental calm and serenity, and that will bring happiness to you. And finally, Vastu says that these are the 8 directions. Let's capitalize on their energy by placing you in, making sure that you're living in a space that capitalizes on the energy. There's no obstruction. And that will bring to you happiness. So we have to recognize that these 3 sciences are just tools. They're not going to deliver the ultimate happiness. We can just use them to bring ourselves closer to better our well-being, so that we can experience happiness in that true sense. So I hopefully answered that question, long-winded way, but that was just to give you an idea of the philosophy behind the practice.
So it sounds like this science is actually cohesive, like together.
Exactly. Yes. Your question was, how do they come together? Yes. The sciences, when they come together, they feed off each other. So for Ayurveda, when I said it works through the 4 pillars of health, one of the pillars of health is movement, and all that movement is guided by yoga. When Vastu comes together, it proposes that appease your 5 senses, use these directions to appease your 5 senses. So it tells you where to practice yoga, which room, and whether you should even create a yoga room in your home. So its guidance is that typically the northeast part of your home is ideal for a yoga practice. And not just for yoga, it could be for meditation, it could be for a prayer room if you are a believer and you would like to pray to God. Those are all the areas of the house. The northeast area of the house is the best suited to create such a room. If your northeast of your home is not suited for a room of this nature, you can always find a room and turn your yoga mat to face northeast while you practice. So this is how, there's like some sort of guidance that comes from each of these that intermeshes. And at the end result, of course, is you have to practice yoga ideally in the northeast setting, and practice it daily to experience best well-being.
Do you have a good best time to practice yoga?
Yes, the one of the recommendations again is sunrise or dusk. Dawn and dusk are very good times, or I would say times when the energetics align. And according to Ayurveda, the elements in the air or in the environment at that time are such that our mind is very receptive. So it is a good time to pray, meditate, practice yoga. There are 2 types of yoga though. So if someone is doing something which is very physically challenging, they could do it a little bit later in the day. So for them, like if someone has a physically challenging practice, the best time to practice would be when the sun is up in the 10 a.m. time frame. But for those who are, in the more meditative breathing realm of yoga, then dawn and dusk are good times.
You mentioned about Vaastu, and I understand there are different sciences throughout Asia. and Feng Shui probably best known. And they have elements like gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Are they similar to Vastu?
Feng Shui came a little bit after Vastu did, and the way I understand it is Vastu, was best used by people who were constructing a house or who were about to design a house. So when you're designing or constructing a house, you can say, yeah, the ideal location for this bedroom or for the kitchen is going to be in this particular direction. So it's very valuable at that stage. However, once the house is designed, and for a lot of modern day living, we tend to move into homes that were pre-built, that were designed and built by somebody else. And they may not have adhered to Vastu or any of these environmental harmonizing sciences. So what does one do in that case? Even though Vastu does have some recommendations that I'd love to share briefly through sharing a slide here with you. But before I do that, I'd like to say that a lot of people will tend to seek out Feng Shui at a time like that, because Feng Shui gives you more of a idea of where to place certain objects in your home. And even though the elements that Feng Shui and Vastu are working with are similar, they are typically Feng Shui is capitalizing on the air and water element. And it is seeking to energize the home dweller with their space. So they're trying to find the best match, and they do it with placing certain objects in rooms and spaces that will enhance the energy of the dweller. And Vastu would, instead of using placement of an object, would tell the dweller where to sleep or where to eat. So, telling the dweller which direction to use. So that they have a little bit of differences. It's just easier to use Vastu when you're designing a house, and it's easier to use Feng Shui once you've moved in, especially if someone else has designed your house. That's the way I would use those two sciences.
Is Vastu actually work the same for everyone?
Why don't I show the slide? I think that
Sure.
would explain this quite well. So let me pull this up. So just very quickly, the elements that you mentioned, since I have the slide open here, in Ayurveda, the 5 elements are ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And the slide is just giving us an idea of what happens when these elements combine, and once they combine, how they manifest. So this is the foundation of Vastu, of Ayurveda, and even of yoga, though yoga has some other elements in play, which are called not necessarily elements, they're called gunas, and we will not talk about that today. But these elements are similar to the ones that you were mentioning, except they're used in a slightly different way in Vastu. So the other question you just posed, which will be best answered with this slide here. So in general, Vastu is suggesting that when we design our home, or once we're living in our home, this is something everybody can do, despite the fact that their room may not be in the right direction. But some of the things that we can all do is have a room that's airy, it's light, and it's decluttered. This is the general advice of both Feng Shui and Vastu. And I think most of us might have experimented with this at some point and noticed an enhancement in energy when we live in a space that's clean and airy, light, and decluttered. Another example I have of how Vastu works in general is a living space. So when we design our living space, and the reason I chose this picture is because it has certain colors that I'd like to speak to, and that is that ideally your main entrance, which is not pictured in this particular room, is in the northeast part of your home, and you want to avoid coloring or painting your front door black. Other than that, there are many other suggestions around the main door, but just so that we get an idea of what's good for everybody. If your main door is in that direction, it's supposed to be good for your energy. Now, in the circumstance that your main door is not there, you can always use a side door which faces northeast and make that your main door. As long as that is the most frequently used door, you can sort of cheat and create that as your energy flow into the home. But regardless, these are good suggestions for everybody. I'd already mentioned you can designate a prayer or a meditation room which faces north, east, or northeast. And this room could have, more sattvic or pure colors. So white, beige, light yellows, and greens are very pacifying for all energies. Another thing that works well for everybody is to have a living room in the north, the east, the northeast, or the northwest. So gives you some choices there. And the living room, the reason I chose this picture, I was saying, is the colors here could be more vibrant because this is the room where the family is hanging out and you want to be stimulated with conversation, with connection. You want to be stimulated to the point where your stomach is, exuding good, appetizing energy, so that when you sit down to eat dinner, you have a good appetite. So these colors of, the reddish tones enhance appetizing energy. So that's, or energy for your appetite, I should say. So that's some, tips that you could use. And the final one I want to say is in a bedroom setting, for instance. Now, ideally, your bedroom is in the southwest with your head facing west. But in the circumstance that that doesn't happen, there are other things you could do to pacify the energy in your room and to draw energy from it. You could use some earth tones in your room. And this way, when you're about to fall asleep, you're not challenged with a lot of stimulating colors around you. But at the same time, the earth tones give you an earth energy that helps you lull you to sleep. So bedroom is for sleeping, and that's what, your ideal color scenario there is. So Vastu covers a lot of ground in terms of pacifying our senses, whether it's through color, through sight, through, even smells, using fragrances in the house and different rooms. So there's a lot of general ground that it can cover, which is good for everyone.
Is Vastu have a solution that can correct the negative energy in your home?
It does. And these are some of the solutions that, since you can't change the direction sometimes of your room, but you can change the direction of your bed, or you can change the direction of your desk. So if you are wanting to study or work, you would be best energized by facing north or northeast. And so kids' study tables could be, oriented in a way that they're facing northeast, which gives them that energy of concentration or focus. So there are certain remedies that even if the room doesn't face the right direction, you can change the furniture setting or choose colors that can energize you. Is there a remedy for everything? I'm not certain, but that's where the other sciences come into play. So if we find that Vastu doesn't have a solution to energize you, then we look to yoga. What sort of yoga practice could you be doing to energize yourself? What sort of food could you be eating recommended by Ayurveda? Or, what sort of planetary pacification could you be doing, which is that whole astrological realm. So all the sciences come into play and give you a solution. There's always a solution. So one cannot, it's not such a hopeless situation. When you're lacking energy, there's many ways you can build it up.
After the pandemic, outdoor living is very important in these days. Yeah. Do you have a typical setting for like outdoor furniture? Which way they facing?
Yeah. So imagine that if you're in the ideal scenario, if your house is facing northeast in the Western society, especially in America, our backyards tend to be behind the house. And so they would be in the southwest direction if the house is northeast, facing northeast, which means that it can be pretty warm at the back in the backyard, and most people will have a water element to cool their backyard, and that's a nice place to position something with water in your backyard. Vastu, though, used to suggest, and still does, that the ideal place for a family to congregate and have that sort of connection is actually in a courtyard. So the way that they felt like the heart of the house was in an open courtyard in the middle of the house. And so a lot of the old Indian homes were structured to have that setting. And weirdly enough, when we moved into our current home, we didn't have a courtyard, but it feels like one because our main home has a couple of other adjoining cottages in the back that create a cluster of buildings. So that is also a scenario that can be taken into account, that you don't look at your own home as a single unit, but you can count upon other homes providing energy around you. And so your backyard could be clustered with other homes, and you could consider yourself sitting in a courtyard. So that would be the ideal scenario. You want to avoid, and the main thing again is declutter. So not too much furniture, just enough for seating of the family, and not so much the direction, but maybe the cooling energy can come in through water. That would be some of the suggestions, through tropical plants. And one of the things that people have used in the past in this courtyard setting is to have a water feature. But typically, and I'm thinking back to, the Indian garden is may have had more tropical plants to offset the heat of a southwest facing backyard. But because we're in California and there's the drought, I'm suggesting that we could still be surrounded by beautiful plants as long as they're native and drought resistant, so that we can still be in harmony with our environment. And that is really key. Sometimes we have to look at what was suggested in the past, but if it is not relevant to current day times, we can tweak it or create a scenario that still serves us without competing for water or any of the other elements that might be lacking.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sumita. Thank you for all the valuable information today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, very welcome. This has been very enjoyable to share. And it's tricky because these are very evolved sciences. So I'm hoping that I was audience friendly in my responses.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too. Bye.